Professor Julian Leff had seen enough suffering to last several lifetimes. For decades, the University College London psychiatrist worked with people tormented by voices, minds that had become battlefields they could never escape. Then, in 2008, something shifted. Leff pioneered what would later be known as avatar therapy. Not with pills, not with surgery, but by giving form to the formless. Let me tell you about one patient. Call him John. For years, John lived in a private hell. The voice in his head wasn't the quiet critic we all know. It was merciless, relentless, unyielding. It told him he was worthless. It mocked his every move. It never let him rest. Leff asked him to do something radical. Visualize this tormentor. Give it a face, a body, make it real. And so John did. On a computer screen, his inner demon appeared, grotesque, cruel, dripping with every insult he had ever endured. But here's the astonishing part. As John stared into the digital face of his enemy, as he began to speak back, something shifted. The voice lost its grip, its power dissolved. In 2017, Leff's results were published in The Lancet Psychiatry. Patients who underwent avatar therapy showed dramatic reductions in voice severity after only 12 weeks. John wasn't healed by medication. He wasn't rescued by years of counseling. He was freed by a single act, seeing the voice for what it truly was. And that's what lingers with me. If a man could face the monster in his head and watch it lose its power, then what about your inner voice? If it's not you, then who's speaking in your head? Right now, as you listen to these words, something else is happening in your mind. There's a commentary running, a narrator making judgments, observations, predictions. It's so constant you've stopped noticing it. I should be doing something else. Am I smart enough to understand this? That person looked at me strangely today. This is what psychologist Charles Fernyhough from Durham University calls our inner speech, the phenomenon he's spent decades studying at the Center for Research into Inner Experience. It's not pathology, it's not illness, it's the ordinary functioning of almost every human mind. But here's what's unsettling. Research using descriptive experience sampling, a method developed by Russell Hurlburt, reveals that this inner voice isn't as unified or consistent as we imagine. When scientists actually listen in on people's inner experience, they discover something profound. The voice changes, it shifts. Sometimes it sounds like you, sometimes like your mother, sometimes like a harsh critic you've never met. John's voices were extreme, yes, clinical even. But the mechanism, a voice that seems to know you better than you know yourself, that claims to speak for you, that never stops commenting on your life. Is that really so different from what's happening in your head right now? The difference isn't in kind, it's in volume. This mystery isn't new. 2,500 years ago in Athens, Socrates spoke of his daimonion, an inner voice that would warn him when he was about to make a mistake. But even Socrates wondered about the source of this guidance. Was it divine wisdom or something else entirely? The ancient Indians had a different understanding. In Sanskrit, they distinguished between ahamkara, the ego mind that thinks it's in charge, and pure awareness itself. The sages recognized that what we call thinking might be more like mental weather, thoughts arising and passing away like clouds in an empty sky. Buddha himself spoke of this phenomenon. In the Dhammapada, he wrote, "All things arise from mind. If you speak or act with a serene mind, happiness follows, as surely as your shadow." Notice what he's saying here. Not that you are the mind, but that things arise from mind. There's a crucial distinction. You are not the weather. You are the sky in which it appears. The Buddhist teacher Nagarjuna took this further, suggesting that what we call the self is actually a composite, a bundle of processes, memories, and reactions that creates the illusion of a unified entity. No permanent self to be found anywhere. But if there's no fixed self creating these thoughts, then where do they come from? Modern neuroscience has been eavesdropping on our inner conversations, and what researchers have discovered challenges everything we thought we knew about thinking itself. When you hear that familiar inner voice, Specific regions of your brain light up in patterns remarkably similar to actual speech. Areas like Broca's area and the left temporal cortex, the same networks involved in producing and understanding language, become active during inner speech. But here's where it gets interesting. Studies by researchers like Simone Ritter and colleagues using both fMRI scanning and descriptive experience sampling reveal that naturally occurring inner speech is actually quite different from the inner speech we produce when asked to think on command in a laboratory. Your spontaneous inner voice, the one that runs constantly in the background of your daily life, operates more like a radio you forgot you could tune. It picks up signals from your past, your cultural conditioning, your fears, your desires, and broadcasts them as if they were original programming. Charles Fernyhough's research identifies two distinct forms of inner speech: expanded inner speech, which retains the back-and-forth quality of actual dialogue, and condensed inner speech, which is more like abbreviated notes the mind makes to itself. Think about that. Sometimes you're having actual conversations in your head, arguments with people who aren't there, rehearsing scenarios that may never happen. Other times, it's more like mental shorthand, quick judgments and assessments that feel automatic. But who's doing the talking? And perhaps more importantly, who's listening? The default mode network, the brain's screensaver, activated when you're not focused on any particular task, spends most of its time doing exactly what John's pathological voices did: commenting, judging, worrying, replaying the past, rehearsing the future. This isn't a bug in your neural software, it's a feature, an evolutionary adaptation that helped our ancestors survive by constantly scanning for threats and opportunities. But your Stone Age brain is still looking for saber-toothed tigers in a world full of emails and existential anxiety. No wonder the voice never stops talking. So what does this make you? Jean-Paul Sartre wrote about the experience of radical freedom, the recognition that we are condemned to be free, responsible for creating meaning in an inherently meaningless universe. But what if the we Sartre was talking about isn't the voice in your head at all? Carl Jung spent his life exploring what he called the collective unconscious, the idea that individual minds are connected to deeper, universal patterns. He suggested that what we think of as our thoughts might actually be expressions of archetypal forces that move through us. The philosopher Douglas Hofstadter, in his exploration of consciousness and self-reference, proposed something even more radical: that the self is like a strange loop, a pattern that arises from the brain's ability to model itself. In other words, you might be less like a thing that thinks and more like a thought that thinks it's a thing. What if the voice in your head is actually a composite character, built from your parents' worries, your teacher's expectations, society's standards, media messages, and your own past experiences, all blended into something that feels unified but is actually a chorus? The ancient question, "Who am I?" becomes even more mysterious when we realize that the I asking the question might not be a single, permanent entity at all. Let me ask you to conduct an experiment right now. For the next 30 seconds, try not to think of anything at all. Just sit quietly and see if you can stop the mental chatter completely. Go ahead and pause the video while you try this. How did that go? If you're like most people, you discovered something unsettling. The voice kept talking. Even when you tried to stop it, it commented on your attempt to stop it. "This is silly. I'm not doing this right. When will this be over?" This is what Russell Hurlburt's decades of research using descriptive experience sampling has revealed. Most people have very little control over their inner experience, and even less awareness of what's actually happening in their minds from moment to moment. But here's what John discovered through avatar therapy, and what you can discover through careful attention. You don't have to believe the voice. You don't have to be controlled by it. You can observe it. When the voice says, "I'm not good enough," you can learn to hear, "There's a thought that I'm not good enough." When it says, "Everyone is judging me," you can recognize the mind is creating a story about judgment. When it replays that embarrassing moment from years ago for the 1,000th time, you can notice, here's the mental habit of rumination in action. This isn't semantic wordplay. This is the difference between being trapped inside a story and recognizing that you're reading one. What Julian Leff discovered with avatar therapy aligns with something meditation researchers have been documenting for decades. The act of observing mental activity changes the activity itself. Studies of long-term meditators show decreased activity in the default mode network, that constant mental chatter quiets down. But more remarkably, areas of the brain associated with metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe your own mental processes, become more developed. Dr. Judson Brewer at Yale has shown that mindfulness meditation literally rewires the brain's relationship to its own thoughts. Instead of being lost in mental content, practitioners develop what he calls effortless awareness, the capacity to witness thoughts without being hijacked by them. This isn't about stopping thoughts, it's about changing your relationship to them. When John visualized his inner tormentor as an avatar, he created distance between himself and the voice that had been controlling his life. In that distance, something profound shifted. He moved from being the victim of his thoughts to being the observer of them. You don't need sophisticated computer graphics to access this same liberation. Every time you catch yourself lost in mental chatter, every time you step back and notice rather than identify, you're doing exactly what John did. You're becoming the watcher instead of the watched. But who is this watcher? This is where things get truly mysterious. If you're not the voice in your head, and you're not even the thoughts that arise and pass away, then what are you? The great sages and mystics have pointed to something they've called by many names: pure awareness, the witness consciousness, the self with a capital S, Buddha nature, the soul. What they all agreed on is this: whatever you truly are exists before thought, during thought, and after thought. It's the constant background against which all mental activity appears and disappears. Think about it this way. In order to know that you're thinking, something must be aware of the thinking. In order to observe your thoughts, something must exist that's separate from and prior to those thoughts. That something, that aware presence, might be closer to your true nature than any voice has ever suggested. The Zen master Huang Po put it this way: your mind is like space, completely open, without center or circumference. In this space, thoughts arise and pass away like clouds in an empty sky. You are the sky, not the clouds. Modern consciousness researchers like Thomas Metzinger describe something similar when they talk about the phenomenal self model, the idea that what we call self is actually a sophisticated simulation created by the brain. But the awareness in which this simulation appears, that remains mysteriously unexplained by purely materialist accounts. Throughout history, mystics have described what happens when the inner voice finally quiets. They don't report emptiness or absence. They describe fullness, presence, a different kind of knowing that doesn't depend on thought. Meister Eckhart called it the ground of being. Ramana Maharshi called it the self. Modern teachers like Eckhart Tolle call it presence, or the now. What they're all pointing to is the recognition that your deepest identity isn't the character in your life's story. It's the awareness in which all stories appear and disappear. This isn't a philosophical concept to understand intellectually. It's a living reality to be discovered through direct investigation. The next time you hear that familiar inner voice, and you will probably within minutes of finishing this video, don't believe it or fight it. Just notice it. See if you can find the place in you that's doing the noticing. That place of awareness, that witnessing presence, that space of knowing. It's always been there, constant and unchanged, watching the whole drama of your mental life unfold. It was there when you were a child, before you learned to identify with thoughts. It's here now, aware of these very words. It will be there when your last thought has passed away. So here's the secret. The voice in your head isn't really you. It never was. It's a function, like digestion or circulation, a survival program running on ancient software. But you are not the program. You are the screen it runs on. You are the sky, not the clouds, the silence beneath the words. The presence that was here before the first thought and will remain after the last one fades. That's what John discovered when he looked his demon in the eye. And it's what you can discover right now, without any machine, without any therapy. The next time that voice speaks, and it will, don't believe it. Don't fight it. Just notice it. Notice the one who is noticing, because in that moment, you'll remember the truth. You are not the voice. You are the awareness that hears it. And maybe that's the real question. Not who's speaking in your head, but who is listening.